We're often told that technology makes our lives easier, but in this video, I'm going to show that technology actually just makes our lives faster. Technology is an accelerant rather than a relaxant, and that makes a pretty big difference. So we have far more technology than any other generation in human history, and it allows us to do things in a fraction of the time that it would have taken our ancient ancestors to do things. It must surely follow then that we must be the most relaxed generation of all time. Agree? Now you might find that claim a bit dubious, but if adverts are to be believed, AI, digital payments, self-driving cars, and automation in general are only there to make our lives easier. We carry in our pockets a powerful computer that can take on the role of pretty much everything. Your personal navigator, your translator, your matchmaker, meditation teacher, your banker. And with so many of our tasks automated, our leisure time must surely have greatly expanded, right? Now, it does matter how we frame this question. If you ask, are we working less than before, research is ambiguous. In rich countries, people work less than laborers who toiled during the 19th century Industrial Revolution, but more than our ancient ancestors would. If you ask, though, are we more chilled out than ever, the answer is no. Many people feel that their lives are frenetic. We're not only expected to work a lot, we're actually expected to consume a lot. Many people feel strung out, stressed out, and burned out. It's important to realize that there's more to work than the amount of time spent doing it. If you were to carve a wooden door frame for 10 hours in the 1600s, it's a very different emotional experience to jumping between 100 emails or meetings and microtasks for 4 hours in 2026. Levels of workplace burnout have been skyrocketing. Now, we might think that we've escaped the Charles Dickens 19th century sweatshop dystopia, but our global economy now basically apportions drudge work to laborers in the global south, while all these middle-class workers plug into this attention-burning digital matrix that yokes us far beyond ordinary work hours. There's all sorts of half work going on, such as checking your emails while you're eating breakfast, or promoting yourself via Instagram while you're on holiday. Even our consumption has become a kind of unpaid work. Every act of buying something with a card, or watching a streaming show, or using Google Maps to get to a concert produces data that will be used to train AIs for big tech. Now, it's easy to brush these off as being unintended byproducts of digital life, some kind of necessary downside to the great benefits brought to us by tech. To truly understand our predicament, though, requires us to look at it more systemically. We don't just live in any economy. We live in a mega-scale corporate capitalist economy. And in such a setting, technology is never used to save time. It's always used to speed up production and consumption in order to expand the system. The basic rule is this: technology doesn't make our lives easier, it makes them faster and more crammed with stuff. Let's look at an example. So imagine it's the mid-1700s and you live 3 miles from the meadow where you work the soil. It takes you an hour to walk there along this rough path. Now fast forward in your head and imagine going 200 years into the future. Imagine that the rough path has now been replaced with a smooth highway, and now it only takes 10 minutes to drive to the same point by car. Surely you've saved 50 minutes. Maybe you can relax in that time. Maybe you can read a book and look at the flowers and the trees. But that's not what actually happens. In our actual system, the technology will be enlisted to expand and accelerate everything. You're not going to exist in a world where that 50 minutes is left free. Rather, your meadow will be paved over and replaced with a giant mall, and you'll now live in the suburbs of a metropolis. Now here's the kicker. You're still going to have to travel an hour to get to work, but now you'll drive at 30 miles per hour for 30 miles instead of walking at 3 miles per hour for 3. You don't get to liberate time for yourself by holding your geographic scale constant while your speed increases. No, your geographic scale will expand as your speed does. And this is how mega cities like Los Angeles develop. They're basically catalyzed or unleashed by cars. Now, this principle applies far beyond cars. Our modern lives are built from these globe-spanning supply chains that require vast logistics systems and incredible communication speed to make sense. Each new technology not only unlocks a new state of expanded acceleration, but will also be used as the basis for new technologies to continue that same process. The vast majority of people in our world do not experience this technology as liberating them. Rather, they experience it as something that basically propagates itself around them and which they must then race to keep up with in order to not be left behind. Consider, for example, all the current AI hype. Believing that AI will save time is a bit like being a person in the late 1800s seeing their first car and thinking, oh, how easy it'll be to get to the meadow now. People back then didn't imagine that by the 1960s, we'd be stuck in traffic jams for hours in megacities. Now apply this to AI. If we fast forward a decade, it will have recalibrated the entire economy to a state of higher acceleration where you'll be expected to do far more at a much greater scale in the same amount of time. At that point, if you're not using it, you'll feel basically like a 19th century villager who finds themselves trying to walk to work in the middle of modern Los Angeles. This is why the stories we hear about tech are so rife with cognitive dissonance. Marketers and futurists will basically place themselves in the position of our proverbial 19th century villager, hyping up the convenience of AI, but if you say, hey, I don't need to use it, they'll then fast forward their minds into the future and issue these dire warnings that if you do not adopt it, you'll be left behind. What they're trying to say in their convoluted and euphemistic way is basically that the global capitalist system doesn't care whether or not you want to use the technology. You basically will have no choice but to use it, and you're not in charge of how it will be used systemically. In fact, nobody is really in charge. You're sitting in an extremely large-scale interconnected economy, and it has certain default systemic processes that will play out unless you stop them. This word default is pretty important. A default is basically something that happens when you don't make a choice. It's the thing that happens in the absence of choice. Now, in the absence of us being able to get together and demand something different, our system will always just default towards increasing speed and growth. It basically only has one gear. This is why innovation futurists always get stuck on a kind of doublethink. They'll tell you that technological change is inevitable and that you better sync up or else you'll be left behind. What they're talking about there is that default. But they then try to soften the blow by telling you that this is all happening because you desire it and because it will benefit you. Now, we actually have to emotionally cope with this sense of inertia that we're in. So often we will accept this circular reasoning. We often do emotionally want to believe that we are, quote unquote, choosing for these things to happen, that we are choosing for AI to be rolled out. But in reality, everybody knows deep in their hearts that these things happen regardless of your personal desire. So let me illustrate this by returning to that example of Los Angeles. Now, Los Angeles only exists in its current form because of cars, which means life will be very difficult there if you don't have a car. Now, in this scenario, you're essentially held hostage by the auto industry, whose products are basically the very thing that has catalyzed our dependence upon giant megacities. Now, rather than acknowledge that, we choose to imagine that actually the car is a savior that grants us our independence in that context. In reality, though, a car is just the minimum requirement to scrape by in a car-catalyzed environment. Another example, of course, is the internet. It's true that if the internet is taken away from you, you will find yourself in a panic, and you might say, I need the internet to save me. But the reality is that the reason why you're experiencing that panic is that the internet has recalibrated the entire economy around you. A person in the 1800s would not experience that panic because their lives are not dependent upon that technology. This also helps us to understand the concept of what's called novelty. A novel thing is something which is interesting and curious and perhaps exciting, but which we are not dependent upon. The internet was novel in the 1960s because it had not changed our environment. The internet now is not novel because it's totally recalibrated our economy to a state of higher acceleration and expansion. And that's why you panic when it's taken away from you. Now, this topic is very close to my heart because I campaign to protect physical cash in places where so-called cashless digital payments are spreading. Now, I actually characterize cash as being the bicycle of payments, but the conventional story is that cash is some kind of horse cart, and that digital payments are rising because they're more efficient. Now, in the standard view, all the downsides of digital payments, which include surveillance, cyber hacking, the centralization of power into big finance and big tech, these things are all just seen as manageable byproducts of our desire for convenience. Whole sections of London are basically now cashless, aka they're serfdoms of the banking sector. And when asked, many Londoners will say, well, it's because cash is inconvenient. What's really fascinating, however, is that these very same people didn't experience the so-called inconvenience 10 years ago, when it felt totally normal to use cash in places like the UK. Now, I'm based in Berlin in Germany, and here in Berlin, people of exactly the same social class as those in London don't experience this inconvenience of cash even now. In fact, there are hundreds of millions of people across the world who view cash as easy to use. So why is it that we have these perceptions of inconvenience that change depending on where you go and when? Well, it's because convenience and inconvenience are not actually absolute properties that can be universally measured or experienced. In my birth country of South Africa, for example, where the pace of life is slower and expectations are different, cash feels totally normal. But in London, it doesn't. And that's because the city has moved into this state of higher acceleration. Now, in the early phases of this in London, digital payments companies invested hugely into nudging people towards this belief that cash was inconvenient and slow and behind the times. But here's what's really important. It's only after the vortex of automation reorganized and recalibrated the environment that actually cash started to feel inconvenient. If you're trying to use cash in a place like Sweden, for example, where many service jobs have been replaced by these cash-refusing machines plugged directly into the banking sector via Visa and MasterCard, it's going to feel like you're swimming against the tide. It literally will start to feel arduous to use cash because all the ATMs have been shut down, the branches won't take it, and you keep getting refused when you try to use it. So what's actually happening here is that the digital payments have been used to accelerate everything. And if you're a person who's trying to live a slower life amidst all the others who are trying to keep up with that new speed, you'll find yourself feeling out of sync. You'll not only be culturally shamed for not adopting the new thing, but at some point you'll just simply be blocked because the foundations of your existence, such as the train system, will force you down this automated path. Now, because we're social animals, we tend to go along with this trend. And because we live in this state of acceleration, that trend is always one way, because our system basically only has one gear. Very importantly, we also have the ability to edit our memories. So we can always find ways to convince ourselves that this is all our own choice. That very adaptability, though, actually prevents us from using the new tech to save time, because under a system that has a growth fetish, we'll be expected to adapt to a new normal in which we have to do more stuff and get more stuff in the same amount of time. The dark irony then is basically that it's the introduction of the new tech that inspires the subsequent irritation at its absence. 20 years ago, nobody would fidget in agitation if they had to wait for 10 minutes for a taxi. Now though, you'll check your phone incessantly if the Uber is running 3 minutes later than you expected. And God forbid the driver cancels because you've probably algorithmically planned everything down to the last minute. We increasingly live this just-in-time life because at a systemic level, there's this pressure to pack as much stuff as possible into the same amount of time at both a consumption and production level. We're just as dissatisfied, only busier. We face the same issue with AI. The latter will just increase systemic acceleration, after which any situation in which the tech is not available will be perceived as inconvenient. This will then be transformed into a belief that AI is some kind of savior that helps you to survive in a frenetic world. At this point, you can cue all those adverts that say things like, "In today's fast-paced business environment, AI gives you the edge." Now, in reality, what's going to happen is that we'll just be more burned out, which in turn will be weaponized to sell us ever more acceleration. Imagine all the adverts saying, "Feeling burned out? Why not automate?" Now, when trying to defend this, economists typically claim that we have this unlimited desire for new stuff. Apparently, rather than dedicating the time gains from technology to leisure, we all just decide to use that time to make more stuff. Now, this is totally bogus because people actually do have a limited desire for new things, because dedicating yourself to endless production and consumption actually comes at the expense of hanging out with your family, friends, and your pets, and doing stuff like walking in the wilderness or surfing the waves. What people actually desire is a balance of many things. But the system that we're stuck in has this unlimited desire for one direction only. That's because the capitalist system is basically a vortex unleashed by humans who no longer know how to stop it. Now, in the mythology of Silicon Valley, and in corporate capitalism more generally, it's generally believed that we expand along with our system, and that new products are basically turning us into fuller expressions of ourselves. The reality, though, is that we're biological beings with finite capacities, but we're ensnared within an economy with an acceleration drive, and its constant attempt to expand just crowds out other stuff in our lives. It's a bit like opening the tap in a bath that's already full and then watching the new water push the other water into the overflow. Beyond the overflow point, all that really happens is that we become more confused and bloated and strung out. This requirement to pack more into the same body and mind in the same time fragments our attention and erodes our patience, which again will be weaponized. Imagine the advert saying, "Feeling impatient? Let's speed things up." The problem goes deeper than this. Increasingly, our tech also opens us up to new vectors of anxiety. Your nervous system is now plugged into this neurotic and hypersensitive globe-spanning information system that's constantly pushing unnecessary things into your consciousness. Perversely, this information obesity actually makes us feel more sluggish. We might be moving faster, but everything starts to blend into one. Think, for example, about digital detoxes. The whole point of a digital detox isn't just to slow down, but it's also to make you feel more in control of your own life, rather than just drifting with the inertia. Now, given that most people don't actually have the spare time to just overthrow corporate capitalism or its geopolitical foundations, is there any way to break out of this? Well, I'd say a good starting point is to go down the Zen path and to realize that all these things we're told that we need are often just illusions generated by the numb logic of a system that cannot value anything except accumulation and profit. We can also try to build balances of power to prevent the worst excesses of the system coming out. That's why I do stuff like defending physical cash. If cash is the bicycle of payments, we have the right to fight for bicycle lanes. Remember though, the only point at which new technology will be used to make our lives easier is a point where we have a steady state economy, where leisure is actually valued rather than a growth-based one. Until that happens, let's stop deluding ourselves. I hope you found this video useful, and please tell me in the comments whether you agree with my assessment or not. Do you find your life getting busier, or do you find it getting more chilled out as a result of technology? I'd love to hear your insights, so please do pop them down in the comments and click the subscribe button. Until next time, much love.